Hello and welcome to part 6 of my Windows Server 2025 training series. Today we're going to be covering all things DNS. So what is DNS? DNS stands for Domain Name System. DNS simply turns domain names into IP addresses. So the best way to think about that, when you visit google.com, DNS is going to perform a lookup to verify Google's IP address or addresses that are going to allow you to access the site, because you can't access a site without actually knowing what its IP address is. So there's going to be two types of DNS lookups. You're going to have your forward lookup, which simply translates domain names to IP addresses. This is going to be the most common. Reverse lookups, these translate IP addresses to domain names. They're going to be much less common, and they're primarily used for network troubleshooting. And finally, the most common Active Directory DNS record types are going to be A records, also known as host records, which is simply a record that resolves host names to IP addresses. And you're also going to have CNAME records, which are aliases. So the best way to think about a CNAME record is, let's say you have a server named file server 1 and you create a CNAME for, let's say, file server 4. You can actually point file server 4's CNAME directly to file server 1. But that's the main purpose there. What we'll be covering today, we're actually going to create an A record, we're going to create a CNAME record, we're going to configure forwarders for each domain controller, then we're going to create reverse lookup zones, and last but not least, we're going to explore creating conditional forwarders. So we'll also get into those and kind of explain a couple use cases there. All right, so with all that out of the way, we're going to hop over to our lab environment, and we're going to connect right into our primary domain controller. So now that we're in, we're going to do a quick search for DNS. Go ahead and open it up, and we're going to pin to the taskbar for easy access later. So as soon as you have this open, you're going to see a quick little overview pane. You're going to see the DNS icon up here. Just tells you what server you're connected to. Same here. And you're going to see your forward lookup zones, reverse lookup zones, trust points, and conditional forwarders. So let's go ahead and expand our forward lookup zones. So with those expanded, you're going to see two here. You're going to see this msdcs.ad.greentech.org. Really, all these are Active Directory domain records, and you do not want to touch these. I have never seen a real-world scenario where I've had to personally touch these, and you're probably not going to run into one either. But definitely keep this protected. Don't modify anything inside here unless there's some crazy reason that you have to. But we see that since we have this installed through Active Directory, we're going to have our primary lookup zone here. And you're going to see that we already have our GTDC1 and GTDC2, which are our two host records. So these are automatically going to populate because we promoted our domain controllers and they're registered with DNS, so that way Active Directory services can function properly. So now that we see these, we're going to create a new host record. And we're just going to call this testing DNS. So you're going to see it's going to apply that fully qualified domain name. And just for testing purposes, we're going to call this, let's just point it to Google so we can actually get a ping back. So the pointer record, we're not necessarily concerned with that currently. We're going to set up reverse DNS in just a little bit. And for this, allow any authenticated user to update DNS records. We'll leave that unchecked as well. So we've created it. So let's open up our command prompt to ensure that that's working. All right. So if we do NS lookup and we say testing DNS, so we're going to see it's looking up through this local server, and the name is going to be the name that we specified, that fully qualified domain name, and it's pointing to that 8.8.8.8, which is what we want. Now let's delete this record. Let's go ahead and remove it. We're going to do another lookup, and it's not there. So you can see DNS records typically update instantaneously whenever they're replicating across your domain controllers or other DNS servers. Usually it's pretty quick, but rule of thumb, usually give it about 5 minutes to an hour to fully populate to everything. But now let's go over creating a quick CNAME record. So you can see our alias name. Let's call this primary DC. And so our fully qualified domain name, we're just going to browse and click GTDC1 or lookup zones, and here, and let's just specify GTDC1. And we're going to leave that same box unchecked, and we're going to click OK. So now we see we have our primary DC. It's an alias, and it just directly points to gtdc1.ad.greentech.org. So what happens if we do a lookup? So we're going to check it out. We're going to say primary DC. And we see, because it's a CNAME, it's going to tell us that the name of the server is actually gtdc1, gives us the correct IP address, and it gives us the alias of the primary dc.ad.greentech.org. So everything's working the way we want it to there. Now that we've gone over A record and CNAME creation, let's go ahead and delete our CNAME record. And let's go right over to reverse lookup zones. So we're going to create our new zone. We're going to click next to continue. We're going to do primary zone, which just creates a copy of a zone that can be updated directly on this server. Pretty typical configuration. And we want to store the zone in Active Directory. So how do we want the zone data replicated? We're just going to leave the second option checked because we want to replicate to all domain controllers throughout the domain. IPv4 reverse lookup zone. And for network ID, we're going to do our 192.168.99. And we're going to allow only secure dynamic updates from Active Directory. All right, and we're good there. So what we're also going to do is we're going to verify our network for our second DC. So we're on the 192.168.106. We're going to create another reverse lookup zone. And next, we're going through the same exact motions we did last time. Now we're going to do 192.168.106. And same setting, allow only secure dynamic updates. With our reverse lookup zones now configured, we're going to work a little bit of magic to get our primary DC to populate. So we're going to click our lookup zone. Of course, nothing's going to be there. And we could statically assign this record. But what we're going to do is we're going to open up an administrative command prompt. And we're going to force this device to re-register its DNS settings. So now that we have our reverse lookup zone configured, you're going to see this register. We're going to refresh, and there's our record. And important thing to remember is pointer records literally just resolve IP addresses to host names. So it's the opposite of an A record. Moving on, we're now going to look at forwarders. So we're going to right click our server name, we're going to do properties, and we're going to click the forwarders tab. So what's pretty cool is because we already had these DNS servers configured prior to us promoting the domain controller, these were picked up automatically. And you can see I'm using the two open DNS resolvers. You can use anything you want here for external resolutions, but the main purpose of forwarders is to forward any results that your primary server cannot resolve in its forward lookup zones. So in this example, anything that's outside of ad.greentech.org, so anything on the public internet, is going to be forwarded to these two DNS servers so they can resolve properly. With our reverse lookup zones out of the way, we're going to move to the final topic of this lesson. We're going to talk about conditional forwarders. We're going to right click and create new conditional forwarder. So the best way to think about a conditional forwarder is to think about if you have any domain that you don't want to route through your own DNS servers and you want to customly route that to another resolver. So in this example, we're going to say google.com. And we're going to add Google's resolvers. So we got our primary, and we're going to add their secondary DNS server here. We're going to store this conditional forwarder in Active Directory, and we're going to do all DNS servers in this for us because we want all of them to populate these settings. So we're going to click OK. And now we see our forwarder, and it tells us where these queries are going to be sent to. So let's go ahead and open our command prompt back up. DNS lookup www.google.com. And there it is. So we know it's working. So that's going to cover it for this lesson. I may do a future lesson where we cover DNSSEC, which is pretty much just some secure extensions to make DNS a little more secure. You typically don't see that in most common Active Directory environments. You only see it in really high secure environments such as government entities or high secure facilities. But if you want to see that, leave a comment and I'll catch you in the next lesson.